Hi, this is Rick Ray. I'm with the performance team for TRIRIGA, and today I'd like to take you through a little presentation that catches you up on some performance work that we've been doing over the last few releases, especially around the lease and some of the platform enhancements. So today we'll give you a little bit of an introduction. I'm going to talk about a lease benchmark test that we did and some new recommended indexes that came out of that testing. The lease journal entries, basically, it's a redesign for performance reasons. Again, I mentioned some platform enhancements, some enhancements to BIRT reporting, and some things about lease disclosure reports that we want to make you aware of. A performance analyzer tool that we produced that really helps you analyze performance issues, and it's very easy to use. And lastly, module level associations. It's a new early adopter feature in the 3.7 release. And then we'll do a summary at the end. Okay, so many of you may be aware that IBM TRIRIGA does performance benchmark testing for all of our releases. That's to ensure that we haven't degraded performance with any enhancements or defect fixes. But we've also had a real concentrated effort over the last few releases to deep dive into some areas of the product and try to improve performance and try to also kind of get a head start on any performance issues before they're uncovered by customers out in the field. So again, as I mentioned, this presentation is just to summarize some of those activities. Okay, lease benchmark testing. We knew that there was a lot of people planning to deploy some fairly large deployments of lease accounting, lease management implementation. So we wanted to do a deep dive into lease accounting early on, and this was back in the platform version 3.5.3.4 and applications 10.5.3.2, and that's when a lot of the newest features came out with lease accounting and lease management. So we set up a database with 17,000 lease abstracts and 24,000 leases. We added additional portfolio data, people and et cetera, to support this data. We ran the test on DB2. I know there's Oracle people out there, but we really feel like DB2 and Oracle perform very similarly. And then we were running CentOS Linux version 7 in the cloud, and that included our database server, which is something that we have not necessarily recommended in the past. But now that the cloud providers are doing very well with what they have to offer, and servers have some really good performance, we found that the database virtualization is not a problem anymore. So we do now recommend that you can go ahead and use your database server in the cloud. So here's what we found with our lease benchmark test. The features are complex. They do require a lot of resources to perform well. In particular, the database server and the process server are very important. Now, we used some really big servers for our testing. Our database server had 64 virtual CPUs. Our process servers had 36 CPUs. We did not max those out by any means. So we're not saying that you would need anything that heavy, but just be aware that because of all of the many calculations that lease accounting, lease management does, you do want to give it some nice good resources. Okay. Also, what we found is performance improves a lot when you have multiple process servers. What we did in our test is we set up a process server that had a workflow agent dedicated to the system user. That's because of a lot of these asynchronous workflows that Lease kicks off for these calculations are run by the system user. And so separating out the system user from all of the other ones um, kind of let the system operate more efficiently. Okay. Um, Another one is the scheduled events user. That user is defined in the admin console, and you can change it. It defaults to the system user. So what we did is we created another admin user and assigned the scheduled events to run with that user, and then set up a process server dedicated to that user for the scheduled events. And again, this is because when you're doing a lot of the generate schedules, et cetera, the lease management, lease accounting is gonna create a lot of scheduled events in the background. So again, putting that on its own server really allowed for the system to be optimized. And then lastly, you always have your one open workflow agent and all of your other agents running. And what we found is the process servers should have heap sizes of 6 gig. We used to recommend 4 gig, but once we got into lease accounting, lease management, we decided that it really helped to have a slightly bigger heap size. And even at 6 gig, it doesn't the garbage collection doesn't cause a problem. So we now recommend 6 gig for in the performance best practices for all of our servers. Okay. And as I mentioned, we had to tune the system as well to get all the. So this was kind of the way we laid out the system. We had to tune it as well to get our good performance out of it, and that came in the form of a lot of recommended indexes. And we'll talk about those in the next topic. Um, so again, once we scaled everything out and tuned it, we got good performance out of the lease activities. Most of the transactions completed 5 seconds or less, but there are complex ones that you're just not going to get that type of response out of. When you're generating schedules or activating leases or some of those major activities, you're going to end up with with longer running transactions. What typically causes the that to increase in time is the tenure of the lease. For example, if it's a 5-year lease versus a 25-year lease, the 25-year lease is gonna take longer to do things with. Similarly, the number of payment line items that you have. So the more payment line items, then the more time it's going to take to do things like generate schedules or activation and those types of things. At the end of this benchmark testing, there were 2 areas of concern that we found, and that was lease journal entry processing, and so we did address this in the 10603 3604 release, and lease disclosure reports, which we addressed in the 3604 platform. And those are 2 topics that we'll be talking about later on as well. Okay, so the new recommended indexes. So we've always had in our best practices a set of indexes that we recommend people put on just based on our past benchmark testing. And so, as I mentioned in lease benchmarking, we found several additional ones, and so those have now been added to the best practices. We really got a lot of good response time improvements and also resource utilization on the database server when we added these indexes. So we highly recommend for you to add those indexes to your system if you're running Lease. In fact, some of them may be beneficial to when you're doing other areas, kind of quite just a little outside the lease accounting, lease management area, but use some of the same tables. So I would advise you to get your DBA to take a look at those. You may want to even put some of those indexes on, even if you aren't a lease accounting, lease management user. And so below is the link. Just you can follow that link. It'll download a PDF. Take a look at section 534 and the indexes will be there. And as I mentioned, we did our testing on DB2, so those indexes are written with DB2 syntax, but it's really easy to change them, modify them to be Oracle if you would like to use them on an Oracle database. All right, Lease journal entries is another one that I mentioned before. So again, we ended up seeing three major issues when we were doing the Lease journal entry testing. The first one was once you had generated your journal entries and you wanted to open the journal entry record to look at them, it would take many seconds to display. And in fact, you know, you might even think the system was hung, but it wasn't. If you just waited, it would come up. And it was due to the fact that the journal entries list in there was not paginated. So it waited until all of the journal entries, and there can be thousands and thousands of them generated for a single journal entry record. It had to read them all in before it would display anything. So once we changed that display to be paginated, it now quickly displays the first page, and then as you paginate through, it reads in what it needs to at any given time. So that was fixed. The next one is there's several different steps in the journal entry process, but there's one called retrieve. And when we were running that process, we noticed the database server CPU could spike to 100%. And it turns out there was a very poor performing SQL query that was doing this. And it wasn't fixable with indexing. So we actually had to optimize that query, modify it to be more efficient. And that resolved the issue. It's now negligible CPU utilization during the retrieve processing step. So that was good news. The big one, though, was the time it took to process the journal entries from start to finish. Um, it took way too long to run the process. I'll give you some statistics here in a little bit. But to fix this issue, we really did virtually redesign the whole process. And we optimized it with features to perform parallel processing, which really helped. So instead of everything happening, in one stream, we now have the ability to have multiple users doing parallel processing on these entries. So almost every workflow was looked at, optimized, changed. Many of the queries were rewritten to be more efficient. And so I'll give you some before and after details here. But like I mentioned earlier, the fixes were delivered in platform version 3.6.4 and applications version 10.6.03. Note that you have to have both to get all of these issues fixed. So you have to have the platform and the application versions, these versions. Okay, so talking about the test and the response times that we found. So again, we took about 14,000 leases and we assigned them to a single business unit. And each lease was set up to have 4 journal entry segments, one of which was the JE level segment. And with this, we expected approximately 175,000 journal entries to get created. And while not exactly part of the journal entry test, just to let you know kind of how large our database is, there was about 12.7 million payment line items in it, and we had about 700 million rows in the IBS spec assignments table. So before any of these fixes came in, when we ran through this process, it actually took over 90 hours to complete. To get those 175,000 journal entries created, which was, of course, completely unacceptable. And believe it or not, after the redesign and the retest, we got that down to just a little over 2.5 hours. So incredible improvement here. So we're very happy about what we were able to do with Lease journal entry processing. So you definitely want to get the fixed version if you're planning to use the Lease journal entry processing. Let's see. Oh, yes. Something else that I want to go through is the parallel processing that I mentioned earlier. Um, so now in the application settings on the general tab, you can identify multiple users for batch processing. And later on, other features of TRIRIGA may use this, but right now only journal entry processing is using it. But for our test, we created 3 users and we assigned those in the application settings. And then we set up 3 process servers, each running a workflow agent dedicated to one of those users in the list. And so then, as the journal entry processing occurs, it lets those 3 users kind of take chunks of work and work on them in parallel, and that really did improve things. Now, if you don't want to set up, 3 different process servers, you can still see some pretty significant performance improvements just with the multiple users themselves. But again, we got the best response time overall when we had the separate process servers. So there's a whole presentation available on the journal entry performance that was done earlier. And you can see the link here. So recommend that you go out and look at that if you're interested, because it goes into all the detail about how you can set this up and what the improvements were in more technical detail. Okay, so in the platform version 3604, we made 3 enhancements that journal entry processing took advantage of. Again, that helped it make improves, some of those response times tremendously. But the good news is these enhancements can be used by any TRIRIGA implementer. So I wanted to share these here um, because you may have you may have custom work that you'd like to go in and modify and use these functions in. So the first one is that dynamic workflows can now pass and return parameters. And that really simplifies what you might have had to do before without the ability to pass and return parameters. You may have had to do some complex processing. So again, that saves time. The query task can now just return the count of records instead of the actual records. Before, you had to actually go get the records into memory, and then you could get the count of them. Now you can say, hey, I just want the count, and it doesn't bring back the data. And so obviously it's much faster just to get the count than to bring back the data. And of course, as your data sets increase in size, this improves even more so, right? So, especially like the journal entries that, are looking at, up to 175,000 or whatever that it's creating, and it wants to know how far along it is. We got some really good performance improvements without having to read data in like that. Also, the memory utilization. So you're not reading in all this data into memory. Um, so that's another plus. Okay, the last one was you can configure a trigger action task to run the asynchronous event that occurs after the transition by a user other than the currently logged in user. That's a big mouthful, but basically this is what enabled us to use the parallel processing for the batch users. Okay, so 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 given that you can assign a user to something, other than the user that's running the process, that's kind of the gist of this here. So even though you could have had a user Joe running the journal entry processing, you can now take that work and break it up and have those 3 or however many you set up batch users run on behalf of him. Okay. All right. Next up, BIRT reporting and the lease disclosure reports. So in 361, we made some changes to the BIRT reporting when you're running a separate BIRT server. We got feedback from the field um, that people with a separate BIRT server were running into some issues. And in diving into that, we fixed a few different bugs that um, were fixing issues, but in the long run, it also improved the performance of that BIRT server. So that's a good one to know. But also, then when we were doing all of this work, we found out that the BIRT server implementation, when you that separate BIRT server, doesn't support the params.display text. And that was used in a lot of the lease disclosure reports. That any BIRT report that uses that would have unexpected issues when you ran it against the separate BIRT server. We saw we saw some crashes. We saw some errors that would appear directly on the report page, etc. It just several different issues based on the different reports and data. And on top of that, if the user tried to rerun the report at this point, it would run properly, right? And so what we found is and that's using the BIRT icon bar. What we found is that BIRT icon bar is driven by BIRT. At this point, it's no longer TRIRIGA running the report. So BIRT assumes that you want to run the report directly on the server you're logged into. So it's not even using that separate BIRT server anymore. And that can cause performance issues because now you're running that report on the server where all of your users are doing their TRIRIGA work. So again, that could cause some lags and performance issues for everybody on the system. So just a cautionary tale there that you don't want to use this params.display text and then run the risk of users going, oh, I'd like to see if it will run again if I click that run again button, right? So then we fixed all the out of the box reports to not use this params.display text, right? And there's a set of instructions on how customers can make the change to any custom reports they've written to not use it too. I have the link that's sitting there at the bottom. So again, while we highly recommend a separate BIRT server, especially for complex reports like lease disclosure, we also make sure that you do avoid the use of params.display text. Okay. Next, I'm going to talk about not so much a performance improvement, but a tool that was written. So a lot of times what happens is customers can, run into an issue and the first thing they think of is, well, I'll just go to support, right? And use the support process to figure out what's wrong. Um, but but a lot of times these issues are simple and they could be fixed locally by the customer if they just knew what to do. And so this performance analyzer tool was written to help with that. Some examples of some of the things you can find are like a custom query that you write, but it's performing poorly. But if you just put an index on it, it might work just great, right? You might have some custom workflows that you've written and they haven't been written very efficiently, and so they're taking a long time to run. And if you could see which one of those workflows it is that's not working, that's not efficient, you would know where to go and take a look. Even the out-of-the-box queries could run inefficiently because TRIRIGA doesn't ship with application indexes. We kind of because we don't know how the customers are going to use a particular application and set of data. So it might be an out-of-the-box query, but again, all it needs is an index to run efficiently. So again, we've developed this little tool called Performance Analyzer, and it really is a nice tool. I want to take you through kind of what it does. So you can bring up the tool and just select the kinds of logging you want. And the logging looks a lot like the type of logging that you see under the performance timings in the admin console, but you don't have to go there. You don't have to be, you don't go to the admin console to do it. Instead, you're just clicking Performance Analyzer. It comes up with the lists of the types of logging you can do. You can select them, say Start, And then you can go to a different session and recreate what it is that's slow. And once you've recreated it, you come back and just stop the performance analyzer tool, and it's going to parse the performance log for you and generate an easier to look at display report. So again, you don't have to dig into a complex log to see what might be the problem. If you do see that the workflows are what's the long running, then we've had another tool available for a long time called the workflow analysis utility. And so you can then run that performance log that was generated by our performance analyzer tool. You can run that through the workflow analyzer utility, and you can break down the workflow into steps and see um, exactly where the issue is there with workflows. So with both tools, you can do a lot on your own, and possibly avoid calling into support and going through. Our support team is great, but the support process is a lengthy process, right? Because you have to provide a lot of data to them for reproduction and et cetera, et cetera. So if you can just use these tools, you could probably do a lot very quickly on your own. So, referring to our best practices for system performance again on the wikis. The first two are about the performance analyzer tool. The first one's an overview. The second one is how you use it and run it, and then lastly the workflow analyzer utility, which has been around for a while. Just to give you an example, so here's, if you do bring up the performance analyzer, you're going to see this screen. And as you see, here's the types of things you can log and your start button at the bottom. And over on the right is how you can like download the log later or upload an existing log and some other types of things. But basically selecting what you want to log, click start. You go, you go recreate the issue. You come back. The button will say stop. You'll stop it. And then it's going to show you a report, something like this. Now, this report doesn't really show any performance issues, but I just wanted to show it to you. So as you can see, I had selected reports, smart object transitions, and SQL just for this, and just ran a quick uh, user scenario. So if there had been, say, a performance issue in the SQL, it would have shown up at the bottom, and you would see what SQL it is that's the issue. Um, again, if I had selected workflows, you could have seen something along those lines. And as I mentioned, then you can take the log and use the workflow analysis utility. Again, if it had been a report issue, then you would know exactly which report it is, and you could go and take a look at that and see if there was something in it that needed to be, optimized. Okay? So, really good tool. We like it, and we hope you do too. All right, our last topic is one that we are calling module level associations. And in the 3.7 platform, we made a modification to support this. In the past, the IBS spec assignments table had all of the different associations between records that were needed. And it would grow to a very enormous size. I think on a past slide, I mentioned that our internal database had over 700 million rows. We've even seen some customers have over 1 billion rows in this table. And so when you have a table that large, it gets harder and harder to manage it, for the database server to manage it well. And on top of that, not only just being large, it's quite volatile because as I mentioned, there are a lot of reads and writes all the time to the table because especially reads, because it's always reading different associations between records, right, to try to put things together. So, along with those two things, indexes on the table generally made performance worse instead of better. So we always advised not to index the IBS spec assignments table. So with 3.7, what we do is we break up that IBS spec assignments table into separate tables called MLA tables based on module type. So instead of one huge table, now you have several smaller tables. And the idea here is that those smaller tables are going to be much easier to manage. Okay. For the 3.7, we just delivered this as an early adopter feature. It's available for DB2 and Oracle databases only, but we want to get some feedback. Not all the references to IBS spec assignments were converted to use MLA tables in this version. Most were, but not all. So we're just trying to get early feedback. Let some people run this in their test environment. Let us know if you run into any issues. But we're really excited about it moving on and becoming the standard in later releases of TRIRIGA. So for the early adopter, we did run the standard benchmark test with both MLA enabled and the regular IBS spec assignments, and the standard benchmark performed as well as or occasionally better. But what we want to do after all of the references are to IBS spec assignments are complete, we want to really stress this, and we expect that we're going to see a lot of improvement either in response times or in database server utilization. Because in some customer environments, especially, we've seen where the IBS spec assignments table can get there can be some contention on that table, again, because it's so volatile. And so we're expecting that once we break it up, and if we stress it in our system, that we're going to see some benefits there. So stay tuned for that as we complete the MLA feature and do more testing around it. But we're really excited, and we think it's going to be great. So there was another full presentation on what MLA or module level associations is all about. Do take a look at it. By the way, for the early adopter, we originally called it module level assignments. That didn't make as much sense as module level associations. So for future releases and for this presentation, we've come up with a new name. It's going to be called module level associations. So, but when you look at the video here, you'll probably hear it called module level assignments. All right, so summary. Again, we just wanted to let everyone know that we've really put a focus on performance improvements. We realize performance is very important. And another one that I wanted to mention here in the summary is I've talked about high-profile things we've done, but for every release, there's always the very small things. An internal defect fix that targets one small area, or a customer-related ticket that then gets included as an APAR or something that is associated with performance. So the better, basically, by the time we got to this 3.7 10.7 release, we've really had good performance, better than we've seen in previous releases. We're happy about the progress we've made. We're not going to stop. We're going to keep going. And so in the future, once we have another set of performance improvements to talk about, we'll give you another update. So I thank you for your time, and I hope you found this to be helpful, and have a great day. Thank you.